Welcome back to Razmafsar TV. Today I'm going to have a very important discussion on Achaemenid bows and archery equipment. First of all, let me greet Bede. Hi Bede, how are you doing today?
I'm very well. And how are you?
Thank you very much. Today we are going to talk about Achaemenid archery and equipment, archery related equipment. And Achaemenid period or Achaemenians are loved by every Iranian. If you come back and say, there is one period of Iran where everyone unanimously says, "Oh, we love them." That's Achaemenids, right? They're such a
Yes.
popular dynasty. Any other dynasty opinions are divided in Iran. Even Parthians, even Sassanians. After that is clear, but the Achaemenids were like everyone loves this period. So I'm very happy to talk about Achaemenian and Achaemenid period. Okay, Beat. My suggestion is, as we discussed it before, I'm going to share um, something here for all of us so we can see. These are pictures taken there. And here we're going to talk about that. These pictures are from Tachar Palace and also some of the Persepolis and some of them from Apadana. But that's not important for us. It's about this Achaemenid legacy. So we are going to discuss that. Okay, picture by picture, we go ahead and we discuss that
Mhm.
Achaemenid archery. Pete, go ahead, please. What do we see here in this picture?
Well, I mean, classically, they would refer to them as infantry archers. They carry um, short spears, a fairly long composite bow. You can see the bottom of the bow in both people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly where it is. And the top of the bow is up above their brow line.
Yes.
The bow in relation to the length of the quiver
Yeah.
uh, is it suggests that the arrows are drawn obviously a long way. That's a long quiver. You don't make a quiver that's 10 centimeters longer than your arrows. That would be pointless. So therefore, almost certainly the arrows are within 2 centimeters of the length of the quiver.
Yeah.
Because it may have a wooden base or a thick leather base. Um, and obviously, you want enough space that because when you see them from the other side, these quivers have a flap that folds down and is tied to prevent weather getting in.
Yeah.
Um, so they're quite interesting. The other thing you notice about the quiver and the bow, they're both worn on the left shoulder.
Yeah.
Now, that may be to free the right hand side. So if the spear is being used one handed or a sword is drawn or something like that, maybe it's that. Maybe like in armies today where they march with their rifle over their left shoulder, it might be just a fashion of the military of the time.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, say if you look in Assyrian reliefs and you see archers, the quiver is worn over the head with the nocks of the arrows on the right shoulder, obviously for right-handed people. Um, but this might be the kind of way you wear your quiver in a parade, because these are the guards of the great king. They're there to impress all of the people coming to offer tribute and presents and whatever. So I'm not aware of any evidence one way or the other whether that was how they wore their quivers into battle. Um, my guess is it probably wasn't. It might be worn on the march like that because it's very quick to get to, and so there's no problem. Particularly when you're not just an archer, but you're a spearman. And in other bas reliefs from Persepolis, you see people carrying spear and shield.
Yes.
And in one case, you see somebody with a really large spiral like cane shield that's wrapped and everything like that, like Kalkan shields in the
Yes.
Safavid period.
Yes.
So shields are important. There are probably other types of shields too, um, but the thing to notice is that in these people who are wearing robes, which are very unsuitable for horse riding at the time, wearing wide sleeves. Another thing that would cause problems if you're on horseback, because they'd flap around all over the place. When you see on seals of the king fighting lions, he has the sleeves pulled back up onto his shoulders to leave his arms free.
Yes.
Like you see it in Japan with kimonos. They even have a special tie, so you can pull the sleeves of the kimono up and tie it around your chest to stop them getting in the way. So a similar problem. There is interesting evidence about those robes, how they were made. If you look at the bricks from Susa, they're clearly in bands, and I think in Luristan, it's not uncommon to make these little abaya type robes that are sewn in bands horizontally, so they're not put together vertically as you would a normal robe. So it's interesting. There's other things amongst this that will show connections with modern day Iran. In I mean, it's probably just accidental, but it's really nice to see when you can say, oh, that hat looks very much like the hat they wear in, not this hat, but the other hats look very much like the hats they wear in Luristan today, or something like that. Because maybe there's a line of descent. I'm not saying a direct line of descent, because people didn't wear those hats 300 years ago. They wore a different type of hat. So, things change. The hats that these guys are wearing are very, we don't know what they are. They may be felt, and they may have been made in molds to get that crenellated, that grooved shape. Probably, I think so. The fact that they're wearing robes is interesting, because that tends to suggest, like in Mesopotamia, people wore robes. The Assyrians started to go in for tunics, short sleeve tunics, and things for military purposes, but robes were very common. Interestingly,
Could it be that these robes or even hats had some metal inserts, like an armor hidden in them?
I don't think so. I think these are purely. I think that these started out as something like an abaya, which is a big rectangle of material folded over and sewn halfway up the sides and then cinched in at the waist to make pleats. I think this is a formal representation of a type of clothing worn in everyday life. Unlike what the trouser, tunic, coat wearing people are wearing, that's a whole different thing.
Yes,
This isn't the same as Elamite clothing before the Persians arrived, because we've got statues and that. But it is a development within that area of Anshan and Susa, and it's possible that it's a development. Maybe this is what the original Iranian tribes, when they migrated in, brought with them. Maybe it's just their style. But it's interesting that as they adopted more and more horsemanship into their culture, that they went towards trousers, boots, and knee-length tunics as the standard way of dressing, because for horsemen it's more practical. But remember, probably when they arrived, they were mainly farmers and pastoralists with carts and chariots. And that would work in a chariot.
That will.
It just doesn't work on horseback.
No, exactly. Should I
But
move
the bows
to that?
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
Okay. Now from the other side we see that, right?
Yeah. And it's not as clear in these. You see it more so in some of the others. That the quiver, you can see the flap, but in some of the others that we'll see in the future, you can actually see the leather straps that tie it closed. And but what I think is important when you look at this, you notice because they're wearing robes, they're not wearing the short dagger, the akanakis.
Yeah.
Because that ties to the leg, and you can't tie that to the leg. That robe isn't split up the sides. It's
do you know these guys who have ropes? Normally, they have that type of akanakis, which is tucked in the front of the belly.
Yeah, and that is like there's the statue of Darius that was made
Yes.
in Egypt, um, where it's a three-dimensional statue, and you can see the dagger stuck in the belt in the belly. Um, it's very decorative, and it's very practical if you're walking around.
Yes.
Not so practical on horseback.
No.
Bear in mind that we don't know for sure whether the Persians adopted the Scythian style saddle with two padded sections either side of the horse's backbone. The Greeks were very dismissive of the Persians, saying that they love luxury and look at all the things they put on their horse to sit on. Because Greeks like Xenophon thought that you should be riding bare skin to horse.
But
Uh,
Greeks, but Achaemenids, they made fun of Spartans who put who did makeup on their faces. So each
yeah.
culture looks at the other with its own
Oh yeah.
standards, right?
I think Xenophon's interpretation of horse riding was very good around Athens, where you didn't ride very long,
Yes.
but not quite so good if you were riding from Persepolis to Babylon or something like that. I think trousers and some kind of padding between you and the horse are a good idea if you're riding long distances. The other
Absolutely.
thing is, if you look closely, I'm not sure if you can see it clearly on these, but you can. Oh, yes, you can just see it.
Mhm.
They're wearing shoes,
Yes, they are.
not sandals and
No,
not boots.
no.
So these are infantrymen. They're set up for marching. Um, I mean, obviously here they're in the palace and everything is good, but it's practical things. Like I think in some of the reliefs you can actually see how the shoes are tied and everything. It's really very detailed. The boots have an outside tie too, but that's a separate piece. Um, because the boots are soft and it's to stop them from sliding around on your feet.
Pete, one question. They put arrows in the quiver, and
Yeah.
is it a flap to close it?
Yeah. Because these quivers are probably that round at the top to
Mm,
make room for the feathers and the arrows. They taper a little bit to the bottom. In these, it's not so clear. And I don't think the taper is very great. Like if you look at Assyrian quivers and Elamite quivers, the taper is quite profound,
yeah.
but these don't seem to be quite as tapered. Um, the flap would stop rain or dust or anything getting in. So it's a very good idea. It's possible. I think some of the Elamite quivers had little caps over them that you can see. Uh, I'm not sure if any of these have survived. In Urhatu, bronze quivers have survived, and they're in museums all over the world because they're very beautifully decorated. And sheet bronze, good material. Uh, I don't know whether the idea of covering quivers was universal, and it's just that a lot of art shows the feathers of the arrows, so there are feathers and there are arrows in there, or whether covering quivers was a thing along the Zagros Mountains up into the eastern part of Turkey, uh, Armenia, and places like that where the Urhatans lived. Maybe the weather made it more important. It's hard to say, really, but they definitely did. And the covers are well designed. I mean, if you were building a back quiver today, maybe you wanted to go hunting or something like that. Uh, this is a pretty good design. It's easy to carry on your shoulder
Yeah.
when you're hiking or marching, but when you put it on, this length of the strap would have just sat it right at the right position. I mean, I'm making a lot of assumptions about the accuracy of the carving here, but as an archer, there's a lot of things I can see in this carving that shows that the sculptors had seen the equipment at least. Maybe they didn't understand how it worked, but they definitely seen it. This is too precise, too detailed.
Yes. Okay, we see here now. Look at this bit.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful. You can see the little decorative straps hanging off the back of the quiver. They have their own little D ring to
This one, yeah.
yeah. Have no idea what they're for. They may have been just to make a nice noise when they marched. They may have been we were just discussing it before we came online. They may have been colored, they might have indicated which regiment you were in. Um, or they might have been just something that people put on quivers for no particular reason. I mean, a lot of things attached to quivers have a reason, like the big woolly balls that English archers used to have attached to their belt were for cleaning arrows to get the dirt off them.
And
Um,
all of them have it. All of them have it, right? Yes.
yeah, they're on all of them in different carvings and different things. You can see more detail. Uh, it appears that the strap on the other side and these little dangly things are attached to separate rings sewn onto the quiver. They're not just put through a hole or something. There's hardware attached to the quiver so that these things can be used. Um,
Because,
actually, when you think about it,
yeah,
we've got the quiver, we're wearing it on the left hand side.
yeah,
You can only see the flap from the right hand side.
yeah.
So that means that if you put the quiver over your shoulder, the flap, you would flip it backwards out of the way. And when you wanted to cover the quiver up again, you would just pull it forward. So it would be on the outside.
Yes.
So my guess is that when you were going to use the quiver, you untied the loop, put it over your head, and you could then flip the flap out of the way to shoot, or flip it back when it started to rain or something, and it was, wrecking your arrows. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, the
Very interesting.
uniformity. I mean, you pointed out to me. Oh, this is a good one for looking at their shoes too, to show that
Yes.
these were people who like walking.
Look at these feet.
Yeah, you can see that that's where the ties must be.
Yes.
It's very very well done. They even are showing the arch of the foot a little bit in the way the bottom of the shoe curves up and then curves down.
Yeah.
uh, which suggests to me that they're soft shoes made out of leather rather than hard soled shoes. Because it took a long time before people started making hard soled shoes. They made hard soled sandals very early, but shoes, I think, were for different types of terrain. The other thing that you notice, everything is, I mean, you can see the bows much more clearly.
Yeah.
And what's different is these, they're not like Scythian bows with their setback handles,
Yeah.
and they're not like angular bows with their angled handles. They have a more or less straight handle, so that when they were constructed, so these almost certainly are meant to be composite bows because of the excessive recurve. Um, they were probably constructed like a smooth curve with the ends hooked over, which they then bent back to string, which left some recurve on the tips. Now, I don't think it would be a great leap of the imagination to suggest that it's a static recurve, that it doesn't bend and straighten out. It's shown as only marginally thinner than the rest of the bow. The bird's heads, which are the nocks for the bowstring, are quite clearly shown.
Yeah.
Um, all the evidence suggests that if I'm the bird on top of the bow, that the string comes over the back of the head and hooks onto the beak.
Yeah.
So that when you pull the bow, the string is operating from the highest, farthest point of the bow from the handle. So you're getting an interesting type of mechanics at the tip of the bow. So ordinary on a bow, the string is just around and it just pulls it like a lever. But this is actually pulling and pushing down at the same time. It they use bows like, I mean, Scythian bows are built somewhat like that. If you see the excavated bows from Xinjiang in the Scythian form, they have a groove that runs up over the top of the curve and a little tab that sticks out, which the loop of the string goes around. So I would guess that this was an innovation whether, I mean, in the bas reliefs of Assurbanipal, there's one of him shooting lions, and you can see the tips of the bows, and the bows tips are lions' heads, and you can see the loop going over the same way. So this may have been something that Iranian tribes brought with them,
Yeah.
and was picked up by the Elamites and the Assyrians.
Okay.
Um, it's hard to say where the idea came from, because a good idea travels.
Yes, yes,
But
absolutely.
it's clear that it's related to the tips of Scythian bows, but these bows are nothing like Scythian bows in their shape. So it's like they've adopted one part of the design because they recognize it's going to make a better bow, but they have other. They wanted a long draw, so a setback handle is not a good design for a long draw. Um, so possibly it was a compromise that they made. We'll get some extra performance from this tip, but we don't want the setback handle because it's going to interfere with our draw. We want a longer draw. It's why Turkish bows are so flat in the middle, is to have a very short bow with a normal length draw. I mean, it's a solution. Persian bows are a little bit dipped in the middle. Crimean Tatars are a lot dipped in the middle,
Yeah.
and it's because they're using longer draws with medium length bows so that they can get away with it. Uh, it's an interesting thing. I mean, we're looking at pieces of carved stone. It's not the same as picking up a bow. And yes, we could make reproductions of the bows that will look like that, but how close are they? I mean, we're lucky. The Egyptians had this great habit of putting bows in tombs in very dry areas. So we know a lot about the construction of certain types of bows. And the people living in Xinjiang province in China had the same habit. So we know a lot about the construction of Scythian style bows because they used bows that are clearly close relatives. Persian bows, they're right in the middle. It'd be really nice if someone found some, parts of it. Yeah, here is the sword that you're talking about,
Yeah.
or short swords stuck
Yes.
in the um, in the belt.
Yes.
Uh, Here we see someone with a Gorytos wearing the robes that the people with the longer bows were wearing. Uh, so it was not just restricted. Uh, the It'd be interesting. That Gorytos also seems to you see the series of dots going up.
This
I
one.
think, yeah, I think they represent the edge of the quiver attached to the outside face of the Gorytos when it's facing backwards.
Yes.
Um, you can also see the cover hanging down. If you follow if you look at the top of the cover, so that's a separate piece of leather sewn as a cover with a decorative end on it. It fits over the bow and the top part of the Gorytos to stop it from being affected by the weather. See, even both styles of archery both take into account that you've got to protect your arrows from the weather. Um, yeah, see, that's really good. You can really see how clearly they showed that as a separate piece
Yes.
on top of the Gorytos. We know about this also. It's shown in Greek pottery. It's shown in Scythian um, gold work,
Yeah.
and sometimes actually show it falling off or flapping in the breeze, uh, because it probably it has a little tie on the top edge where it ties to the support that the Gorytos is balanced on. And when you want to take it off, you just undo it. I would guess you just throw it on the ground, and come back for it later. The ones that the Royal Guard wore were probably decorated with gold and things, so maybe you wouldn't. But in general speaking, or maybe you just, I don't know, just tied it back to the Gorytos and it fell flapping around. There are some Greek paintings that show something like that, though we have to be a bit careful because um, when you there's a good study of this. When you look at Greek paintings of people in Scythian and Persian dress, sometimes they have names written next to them and they're Greek names. so that they're not actually showing Persians or Scythians. They're showing Greeks dressed up as Persians or
Yes,
Scythians,
that's right.
possibly for a play or something else. I don't know, but you've got to be really careful looking at the Greek representations, not to be thinking, well, they're Greeks and they made beautiful statues, so therefore they're accurate observers. They're not necessarily accurate observers. Their idea of drawing trousers most of the time is to draw a pattern on people's legs. And I mean, sometimes they actually show volume to trousers, but
Yeah.
other times they've just drawn a figure and drawn patterns on it.
Pete, do you know of anyone who has reproduced this Goryto here?
I made one years ago. Um,
Where is it?
I've seen people on YouTube make representations of them. In one case with two straps, which meant you couldn't turn it. And they came up with this interesting idea of drawing from behind your back. And this is, all the ones, Scythian ones, and the ones at Persepolis in the carvings where you can see how they're suspended. They have one point of suspension and you can turn them.
Turn, yes.
Because, I mean, that's even the Greek vases and that where they show the Gorytos in use when it's worn on the belt, and the Scythian goal work, you can clearly see that they rotate it so that the opening for the bow is facing forward, whereas in general walking around, it's always facing backwards. So you've got a field of action for your arms. Otherwise, they'd just be getting in the way all the time. The only people I know of that using bow cases, which are always worn on the same side as the Gorytos, which is the left-hand side, that had the bows always facing forwards, are the Manchus. And I think it was mainly because the bows were so big that you had to be able to hold them and keep them out of the way. If you were riding along on a horse with a bow case with a really big bow facing backwards and you went past a bush, there is a good chance the bush will have a branch that will catch between the string and the bow and pull it out of the bow case. Whereas if it's facing forwards, so the bigger the bow, the bigger the risk. I've done that just walking through heavily wooded country with a bow case with the bow facing backwards and a branch catching the bow and just pulling it out of the bow case, and 20 meters along, I think, where's my bow? And I look back and it's hanging in a tree behind me. So these are, there are practical reasons for doing this thing or that thing.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. Look, Pete.
Yeah, you can see that decorative edging. It looks almost like it's scale-shaped objects with little curlicues on the top, which is probably a standard form of. And think about it: the bow case, the Gorytos, the bow case part of the Gorytos is determined by the size and the shape of the bow. And in Scythian ones, which I don't know, I've got a book on Scythians here. Well, I'll show you later when we don't have the pictures up. On Scythian ones, if the bow case is that wide, the quiver is that wide. But in these ones, the quiver is almost as wide as the bow case, give or take a couple of finger widths.
Pete,
So they were.
Follow this line. Please follow this line. When you see that closely, as I did, look, follow this line. You see?
Yeah.
You see how clearly, the carver wants to give you this feeling. You see that, Pete? Look at this.
Yeah.
Amazing.
The person carving these had seen the real thing and possibly seen it very often, because this might be part of the standard ceremonial dress, is to wear certain parts of equipment. If you look carefully, you can see that the cover for the bow case isn't cut off straight, it's cut off at an angle.
Yeah.
And that means that it doesn't flap up and it gets a better shaping around the thing. I would guess that we're looking at something like a Scythian bow case where you've got, against the body, you have a piece of leather folded, probably from the top down,
Yeah.
and then stitched along the bottom. to conform to the shape of the bow. You notice the curve of the bow at the top and the curve of the bow case at the bottom are pretty much matching. The depth of this, you almost get a feeling that there's an angle to the bowstring, that the bow is not sitting straight down in it,
Yeah.
which might mean that this type of Gorytos allowed you a bit more flexibility about putting the bow in. There was space. It was easy.
Yeah.
It was practical in battle. Um, the other thing is, look how he's resting his hand on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just how you stop. If it's got a single point of support, it doesn't stick close to your body. It will turn backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
So this is, if you're walking with one, this is the best way to control them. This is true of any kind of quiver too on the other side, but this is a very good example of how, when you're wearing a Gorytos, you would walk with it.
Look at these feet. Fascinating.
Oh, this is even better because he's thrown his coat over his shoulders, which is very common in illustrations and that.
This one.
And it's kind of draped over the Gorytos.
Yes. Look at this one, you mean, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, oh, gee, oh, it's getting cold. I'll put this on. And he doesn't even notice. Well, there's no way he can drape that over his shoulders without something going wrong like that. He could sweep it back underneath the Gorytos so that it would go down there and kind of curve round to the back, possibly a bit more elegant than what he's done. And he can, well, there's lots of ways of dealing with this. This is a good time to make a comment on the people that use Gorytoses in these carvings. Nearly always are wearing a tunic and trousers and boots.
True.
And this often is called in scholarly literature median dress, but I would suggest that it's more appropriately called Iranian dress, because I think this is the Iranian tribal clothes. And when you think of it, kamisva shalva, we're talking about a shirt and trousers. This is a classic piece of an ensemble of clothing that still exists. Go to Pakistan and see all the people dressed basically the same way. This is really continuous.
Just to make sure, Iranian would include all these Median and all these tribes in Iran, which
yes,
is
yeah, because we know about the Parsa and the Marda, or the Medes.
Yes.
So the Persians and the Medes are the most prominent tribes, but there are Sargatians, yes. There are lots of other tribal groups who spoke an Iranian language, yes, who had a similar lifestyle, though it's important to separate the people in Pars, as it was then, from, say, the Scythians, who were fully nomadic pastoralists, as opposed to people who migrated into an area and who were farmers as well as horse breeders and cattle breeders. I think it may have been that there was a kind of complex interchange between people who were living in a pastoral economy and people who were farming. But it could be like in south western Iran today, where you have part of the family takes the sheep up in the mountains in summer, and the other part of the family stays at home tilling the soil, where it's not a separate lifestyle, it's a part of an overall economic solution. I was not aware of how this worked. I read a book called the Nomadic Alternative, where the author, who is a very, very good writer, but he cites from big studies done in southwest Iran about the transhumance pastoralism that they had there. And it's a different type of thing from nomadic pastoralism. They're nomads. They go up and down the mountains, and they take a lot of stuff with them, but they're not like, say, Turkish or Mongolian nomads who are migrating vertically in the latitudinal sense, where they're going north in summer and south in winter. It's a different thing. And the number of horses that were raised by, say, the people in southwest Iran per head of population is much lower than the number that was raised on the steppe. And the other side of that is the people who had less horses spent more time breeding to get the best horses, because horses were rarer, so therefore more valuable, so they wanted better horses. And you get this in the Greek authors talking about Nisaean horses and things like that, where they're aware that the Persians were spending time to breed better horses. So, you know, we people use the word nomadic and clump all these things together when we're talking about different types of economy and different types of exploitation of natural resources. And it's important not to lump everybody together and say, oh, these are all kind of galloping around crazy people. They're not. They've got very complex organizations.
Look at this.
This is a nice one. You can see the suspension point for the Gorytos.
Yeah, yeah.
Metal pieces like this have been found. So we know that this is not just an artistic thing, it's a representation of a real object. You notice too, it appears they're wearing almost knee-length boots, because you can't see the top of the boots and you can't see the bottom of the trousers. So it's a boot. You can see sometimes, and in some of the earlier ones, you can see a tie that goes around the ankles and under the foot.
True.
And these are also seen in Scythian gold work, and they're clearly for people who make soft boots to stop the foot sliding back and going up, you know, like the heel of the boot to come under the heel of the foot. A very simple solution to the problem. It's really easy to replace the straps when they wear out, and you don't have to replace the boots because they, you know, the back of the heel has become part of the sole and worn through because it's thinner leather. So, as I say, this is a one would say part of a complex of technologies that the Persians and Medes, or the Iranians living in Western Iran, probably absorbed from the Scythians, saying, well, you know, this works. And bearing in mind the Scythians invaded down there and probably burnt towns and caused all kinds of problems. So the people seeing it said, we can adapt to that, we can change. And they did. But when you look at the vast number of figures in Persepolis, you can clearly tell the Scythian and Saka people from the people wearing this Iranian trouser tunic clothing because of the hats. Hats are very distinctive. I keep thinking of in Peru, where each tribal group has their own shaped hat. And that's how they come from such and such a village, because they're all different types of hats, and they're wonderfully embroidered and everything like that. But hats can be a symbol of your tribal affiliation. Yeah. Look at Uzbek hats. And, you know, today you see Uzbeks wearing those little square caps.
Yes.
And
these similar hats are now worn in many villages in Iran called kolah namadi, felt hat. Many villagers in Iran have this still.
Almost certainly that these are exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Because
exactly similar,
when you think about it, it's a really basic way to make a hat. Felt makes a good hat. It keeps you warm. It stops the heat coming in summer.
Yeah.
Because the ones nowadays, they're white, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think nowadays there's ones that have turned up brims as well, and they kept developing. But quite clearly, what we're looking at is this is a very basic part of southwestern Iran. And even like the Sasanian period, you know, like 500 years later, the only difference is they're flattened. I mean, they flatten in. because we've got helmets made like hats,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and the actual shape, you could tell what the shape is. I mean, these might have been flattened a bit too. The modern ones are much rounder and look much more like these. So, in and out of fashion, different changes of the same basic idea.
This one. Yeah.
Yeah, this again, you can see uh, if you look at the top edge of the quiver down by his thigh, you can see the two divisions, which are the bow case proper, which is behind, and the quiver, which is in front.
Yeah.
And you can see where that's sewn on. I mean, this would be a physical object. It probably has a strip of wood sewn in the upper part to keep it stiff.
Yeah.
Because they didn't always make stiff leather. Sometimes the leather's quite soft.
Mm-hmm.
The the gold ones from Scythian tombs and things like that. Sometimes there's a division at the end when you're looking end onto it, dividing the bowcase side from the quiver side. Uh, so these are all things that are quite important to the people that are making these. A Gorytos is a very good design, particularly if you are riding without stirrups and mounting from the what is the left hand side of the horse, because that means your bowcase and quiver are over there and the horse is here. And when you throw your leg over, there's nothing that's going to get in the way. You'll notice when they show you the Achaemenid, the short sword, it's tied to the leg so that when you throw your leg over the horse, it's not going to flap around. And it's quite deep into the scabbard because they've got surviving scabbards and the dagger part, and it's designed not to fall out.
Yes.
The it makes you wonder about some of the Roman and other things where they were for a long time wearing the swords on the right hand side. So when you mounted a horse from the left, it must have been quite difficult. Maybe they didn't mount from the left. Maybe they mount from the other side. And here you can see that Achaemenid. It's also on a swivel. It's got a strap that goes around the lower part of the thigh near the knee. In some, you can see there's a little loop at one end, and that's where you pull it through and tie it to hold it in place. You can also see the a remarkable decoration at the end of the cover of the Gorytos, way up near the man's hands behind.
Oh,
And we will show you when we're finished with these slides one that's been found. They actually have an archaeological.
this part.
So this part here, which is just sewn onto the cloth cover. That might be cloth cover. It might be a soft leather cover. Doesn't matter whatever it is. It would have been waterproof. If it was felt, for instance, you can rub sheep's fat into it,
Yeah.
which will waterproof it. The only problem is that it attracts all the neighborhood dogs who want to eat it. But well, you win some, you lose some.
Look at this
But
one.
yeah, these are beautiful examples. Oh, and the following man, which we will for fun call an infantryman, you can see the strap arrangement on his quiver, how the flap is held closed.
Yeah.
And I'll make a guess here. I'm going to say that one strap ends with a slit, the other strap goes down through the loop, comes back through the slip, and it's pulled into a little bow to make it easy to undo quickly.
Yeah.
I've made things like that, and they work perfectly. They require no buckles, no metal at all. You can do it all with a strap.
Same thing.
That's a beautiful example of it too. That you can really see that clearly. It's interesting. I don't know whether it's significant, but it's interesting that the people that we'll call infantry have different shaped beards than the people wearing the Iranian style clothing, trousers and this is again, you see that fitting on the end of the cover. You see the beautifully decorated shape on the Achaemenid. where the strap goes around, that beautiful triangular piece. And these have survived and they're beautiful.
Yes.
Again, you can see quite clearly how the strap is tied to the flap, how there's a loop sewn onto the quiver. The strap goes through the loop, comes back up, and probably goes through a slit in itself, and then it's just tied off. Really good leatherworking design.
Examples of this shape also can be found in National Museum of Iran Boston.
Yeah, and they're often really beautiful works of sculpture. Well, look at that one. That's got so much detail in it.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're animal heads, sometimes they're other things.
Yes.
Sometimes they're three things chasing each other.
Yeah.
It's just, hey, we've got something to decorate. Let's put something really interesting.
Fascinating.
And we point out that they're wearing a long belt looped around themselves twice.
Yeah.
And this allows, when you tie things to the belt or attach them to the belt, it to pull down on one side and pull down on the other side. So you get a really good grip, on your waist. So things don't move around too much. Even as late as the 17th century, some Turkish sword belts were made to go around your body twice and tie off. And that just made the whole thing sit better and not move around. This is how old it is. This is 500 before present, or before the current era, BCE. I get my BPs and my BCEs and my BCs all mixed up sometimes.
Yeah.
Again, this is a really good example. You can really clearly see how this works. You can see also that the band that the shoulder strap's attached to goes under the strap.
Yeah.
So that's actually probably sewn onto the quiver,
Yeah.
whereas the strap is probably sewn onto the flap and just comes down, goes through the loop, comes back up, and is tied through a slit in itself. Or possibly it's double-ended. I can experiment, find out.
This
Yeah.
It looks like a short arrow or a spike.
My guess is they're straps and they're decorative ends made of metal.
Yeah.
And they've spread them out to make them look pretty. But I think in reality they probably swung around and the metal pieces made a noise when they hit each other. Like, bolo ties in America, the cowboy ties that have the little slider and the little metal ends. I think those little metal ends are the same kind of thing. I'm saying metal. They could be bone, they could be ivory, they could be horn, they could be anything.
I have one of them when I was going to college, to university in the United States. I was given as a present one, but I don't know where I buried it. Possibly somewhere in my library.
Yeah. Well, I got the fittings of one given to me by Dr. Grayson, and the pendant part was a red glass arrowhead that he'd made, and napped out like a stone arrowhead, like one of these. Oh, actually, I don't know whether this will come out, but that's a little stone arrowhead from North Africa, and they're jewelry. I know you can go hunting with them, but they look like jewelry to me. See, you can see that curve in the bow in the cover. So it's a fairly deep shape.
Deep, yes.
Comes right back almost to the string, curves up, and then recurves a little bit. What that would do in a bow is now, judging from other Persian artwork, the bow is not straight. It doesn't run straight down like that. It actually has a setback handle like a Scythian bow. And but by making it this deep, you increase the brace height, and an increased brace height gives you a straighter arrow because it doesn't have to bend around so quickly. I mean, Korean bows have low brace heights, though they have that whole setback shape too. And that is a bit of a problem. Korean archery has a lot of technique built into it to stop developing problems with their arrows having that low brace height. They do it because it's more efficient, but they've also developed a way of shooting accurately with it. So it's not a simple problem to solve. This is another way of doing it, and it looks like it's well designed. I mean, if to
Pete,
yes,
look at this. Look at the
yeah,
variances. Some of them have very big shapes, and this one, look how
yeah.
simple it's made.
Look, until I saw the excavated example, I thought these were just stitched on little, you know,
Yeah,
decorations. I didn't realize they were metal decorations sewn on.
yeah.
And obviously, they're there to put some weight on the end of that cover so it shows the shape of the bow under it. They don't have to do that. It just makes it look better.
Yeah.
And perhaps it makes the cover fit better too. I don't know. We will have to make one of these and find out.
Pete,
I
please,
mean, yeah,
one of them.
yeah, I definitely will.
Perfect.
I'm well. I'll make several of them and I'll send you one because these are really interesting as a practical hunting equipment setup. These are quite a good idea, and you can do other things with them. In some of the Greek um, vases, they show them as baldricks with baldricks. So you wear them over your shoulder, but they hang down to your waist, and they're I mean, that's because they're not hunting on horseback with them. But even so, it's a practical thing. And I mean, it's just like a neat little thing you can put in your luggage. It's a great idea. The
Just
thing
one point,
is,
Pete, just one point. They were most certainly made of leather. Am I correct?
yeah, I would say all the surviving ones have been made of leather. Sometimes they have a wooden rod on the upper side to keep them straight and stiff.
Yes.
Sometimes in the Scythian ones, there are gold plates that are sewn onto the leather um, to make them more beautiful and more valuable.
Mhm.
I would imagine that was probably done in Persepolis as well. They never show it clearly. Maybe those little dots were little sewn on gold objects because sewing gold onto fabric or leather was quite a common thing. Different. The Scythians love a particular shape on their Gorytos of the quiver openings and that, and perhaps in Iran they had a different style.
Mhm.
We don't in Persepolis ever get to see the top of the Gorytos itself. We only see the cover, so we don't know what the shape was. It's almost certainly just a straight line. Or look at the decoration on the handle of the short sword.
An
Again, the
example of a
artist had
Kanakis, excuse me, an example of a Kanakis in the National Museum of Iran, surviving examples, had the same handle and the same shape. It is as if it was taken from there, but the real piece.
the fact that you have an artistic representation and a surviving piece suggests that maybe we're looking at mass-produced arms and armor. What do you think?
Yeah.
Something that was produced
You know, in
like
my book, Arms and Armor from Iran, one of the Achaemenid from National Museum is exactly this. It
oh,
is unbelievable.
yeah,
Unbelievable.
I've got it just there. We'll get it down and have a look after we've gone through these. But yeah, it's just wonderful detail. The thing that interests me is the design of that is for a quick backwards draw and a forward stab.
Yeah.
Um, it's the 6-gun holster of the of the short sword wheel. Because I mean, these don't have great reach. This is when you're within grappling distance of your enemy,
Absolutely.
and it's really interesting. As I say, this is really designed so when you mount your horse, because no stirrups, you've got no support, you jump on your horse. Um, when I first learned to ride, we rode bareback, and for a short person like me, the hardest part was getting on the horse's back. And we did it bareback, so therefore there was no saddle. There was you could hold on to the horse's mane, and as long as you didn't jerk it, the horse would accept it. But if you jerked it, the horse would not like you, and that wasn't a good thing. Uh, but it's funny. I've actually mounted bareback with a Turkish quiver full of arrows, and not had an arrow move, because once you lift yourself and then throw your leg over, the quiver stays fairly flat. But this is like maybe only 500 years after horseback riding became a large scale thing. We're not looking at um, cultures that are fully developed. We're looking at cultures that have adopted horse riding from their neighbors because their neighbors were burning their villages and they thought, well, we've got to stop them. It's very interesting when you look at how, well, look at the Gorytos defines how long the arrows can be.
Yeah.
So in this case, the arrows can only be long enough to go up to where that cover comes down from wherever the bottom of the quiver part is.
Yes.
And that means the arrows are probably only about 65 centimeters long if you relate it to a normal sized person, which is a draw to about here.